I trusted her with my whole life, and then I heard her confess everything, on my own security camera. That was the moment I stopped being her husband and started becoming a stranger in my own home. Saturday afternoon had this soft warmth to it, the kind that made you feel like things were just normal. We were having some company over, our good friends Mike and Rachel. Ever since we moved to Houston, they'd become a staple in our lives. Dinners, backyard get-togethers, Sunday movie nights. If we were doing something social, chances were Mike and Rachel were involved. We were all around the same age, early 30s, each with a college degree and a mountain of student debt we liked to laugh about but quietly stressed over. Careers were underway, but none of us were where we thought we'd be by now. Mike's job had him bouncing around a lot, and lately my wife, let's call her Laura, had also started traveling more for work. Laura was actually getting ready for another one of those trips that afternoon. Mike had just left our place not long before, heading out west for a project. I remember watching him from the porch as the taxi pulled away, his suitcase bouncing in the trunk. It had become this unspoken routine. One of them would go on a trip and the other would hang back, usually spending time with us. When Laura or Mike was out of town, the left-behind spouse often came over for dinner or a relaxing weekend to break up the loneliness. That day Laura and Rachel were in the kitchen, catching up, sipping on something light. I figured it was a good time to duck into the garage. Honestly, I needed the mental reset. First thing I did was tidy up my workbench, just putting things back in order. Then I moved over to the security system, something we'd put a fair chunk of change into after a string of break-ins in our neighborhood. We had cameras and mics set up all over the house, each one feeding into a secure server up in the attic. The cool part was that everything synced to the cloud and got saved anytime the motion sensors kicked on. I could check in on any room using my phone or computer. Out of habit, I opened up the app just to make sure everything was running smoothly. Meanwhile, back in the kitchen, Rachel was asking Laura about her last business trip. I heard her voice drift over from the open door. "So, how was your trip out there?" Rachel asked, stirring her drink. Laura let out this soft laugh. "You know, same old thing. Meetings, client dinners, maybe a drink or two at the hotel bar. And eventually, sleep," she said almost with a shrug. "The usual work trip drill." There was something in Rachel's tone when she spoke again, a kind of concern layered under the casualness. "Do you ever think about the people who kind of forget they have a family when they're on the road?" she asked gently, glancing over at Laura. Laura didn't answer right away. She took a second, long enough to make it feel like she was really thinking about how to respond. Then she picked up her glass, took a slow sip, and leaned in just a little toward Rachel. "Don't stress about that stuff too much, Rach," she said quietly in a tone that was meant to reassure. But something about her pause, something about the way she said it, left a weird taste in the air. "I really wouldn't worry too much," Laura said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Mike always comes back to you, doesn't he?" Rachel nodded, but there was a hesitation in her voice. "Yeah, but I can't help wondering what he's really doing when he's out there, you know? Alone. I mean, if he is alone." Laura didn't skip a beat. "Don't overthink it, Rach. Honestly, whatever happens when someone's away doesn't matter." There was something about the way she said it, so firm, so final, that made me pause in the garage. My hands were still busy with the tools, but my mind was elsewhere. Whatever happens when someone's away doesn't matter. That line echoed in my head like a cold wind hitting an open window. Rachel asked her, "What are you saying exactly?" "I mean just that," Laura said flatly. "What goes on outside the house? It's not important." I stood there suddenly still. That sentence, "it's not important," settled in my chest like a stone. It wasn't just careless. It was revealing. And somehow, in that moment, a sickening realization began to crawl into my thoughts. Was there someone else? Someone from those trips? Was he taller? More successful? Better looking? Richer? None of those possibilities gave me the clarity I was hoping for. They just left me with this hollow disappointment, a feeling that something sacred had been quietly taken away. An invisible hand had pulled a thread loose from the fabric of our life, and I was just now seeing the unraveling. Still clinging to some last shred of doubt, I told myself I had to be wrong. This had to be some strange misunderstanding. But deep down I knew what I'd heard. My wife Laura hadn't just slipped. She'd let something slip out, a truth that I wasn't ready to hear. That evening I found myself avoiding her gaze. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, angling the screen just enough so she couldn't see it from the hallway. She passed by, moving from the bedroom toward the kitchen, walking with that same quiet grace she always had. But this time she didn't say a word. No hey, no smile. Nothing. It was like I wasn't even there. The silence between us was thick. It clung to the walls and filled the space like smoke. Why didn't she ask me if something was wrong? Did she know? Or was this some strange, emotional chess match where we both pretended nothing had changed? I took a deep breath, trying to quiet the noise inside me. I couldn't let my emotions get the best of me. I needed to stay grounded. I needed to think. A few weeks back, she'd barely seemed interested in our conversations. She brushed off details, got lost in thought, changed subjects quickly. I tried to stay focused. No, I told her when she asked what I was working on. It's a new design project. Just trying to fix a mistake I made on the first draft. She softened a little then, her voice losing its edge. You're being too hard on yourself. Everyone messes up now and then. Funny thing is, I almost said the same thing. Almost. But I held it in. I didn't want to reveal how much her opinion still meant to me. I just nodded, let it be, and tried to pretend that everything was normal. Eventually, she drifted back to the couch, her presence there more like a shadow than a companion. We barely talked the rest of the night. When I woke up the next morning, she was already dressed, neatly buttoned up in her work suit, hair done, ready to leave. It was barely 6 a.m, the time I usually went for my run. She stood there near the door, keys in hand, like someone who was always moving forward, while I stood still, wondering when exactly I'd been left behind. I made you some coffee, Laura said softly, placing the mug on the counter. Her voice was barely above a whisper, and it wavered like there was more she wanted to say, but something was holding her back. She stood there for a moment, then asked, "When did you find out about the pills?" I froze, my hands wrapped around the warm mug. I had only learned the truth yesterday, but something in me didn't want her to know how fresh that revelation was. Maybe I didn't want to give her the upper hand, or maybe I just didn't want her to think this was all still sinking in. Last week, I lied. The words felt bitter leaving my mouth. Everything about the situation was already messy enough, especially now that we were facing the legal maze of property division. Looking back, not signing a prenup was a blind spot I hadn't thought twice about when we got married. We were in love, building a life together. Why would I ever have prepared for war with the person I trusted the most? But now, in the thick of it, I knew better. If the investigators had uncovered anything concrete, any tangible proof of her actions, it could have given me a major advantage. Maybe even the leverage I needed to walk away with a fair portion of what we'd built. Unfortunately, the lawyers we hired seemed more interested in dragging the whole ordeal out than in finding the truth. The longer it lasted, the more they stood to gain. As I sat there, pretending to scroll through my phone, I couldn't help but notice how composed Laura was. Calm, polished, maybe even too composed. She'd planned to freshen up, eat a quiet dinner, and relax a little before our guests arrived. It had been a long week, sure, and she wore the fatigue well, but I couldn't shake the thought that behind all that poise was a carefully crafted mask. I glanced at my phone again. A message from Rachel had just come in, 5 minutes ago, time-stamped right as the sound of the upstairs shower cut off. Right on cue. If everything stayed on schedule, Laura would come downstairs just in time to greet everyone. "They're almost here," I said aloud, more to myself than anyone else. When Mike and Rachel arrived, I tried to act natural, but something in the air shifted. For the first time in a long while, I really paid attention to Mike. He was unusually observant, his eyes darting from Rachel to Laura, then to me. I could tell he was reading the room, trying to make sense of the strange tension. "We're doing a European-style dinner tonight," I said, trying to lighten the mood with a little enthusiasm. Rachel slid into the seat beside me, smiling warmly. Laura took the chair next to Mike. There was an awkward pause. Mike and Laura exchanged a quick glance, nothing obvious but enough to make me feel it in my gut. They both looked away almost instantly. Then Rachel let out a sudden laugh, the kind that breaks tension like a match to dry twigs. And for a moment it worked. I actually found myself enjoying the mood again. Mike seemed like he wanted to say something to Rachel, but instead, he quietly excused himself and went to the bathroom. I watched them, Laura and Mike, as they moved around the living room. There was something strange in their eyes, like they were trying not to say something out loud. Were they whispering? I couldn't hear a thing, but my mind filled in the blanks. And it didn't like what it came up with. Rachel came back into the room a few minutes later, and the four of us regrouped, this time with a little more ease. She and I sat side by side again, smiling as we joined the others. And yet, underneath all the laughter and conversation, a single thought lingered like a splinter I couldn't pull out. Something was wrong. And I was finally starting to see it. "So," I said with a half-smile, trying to keep the mood light, "you two aren't exactly jumping at the idea of one of those European-style open marriages, huh?" Rachel, sitting beside me, let out a burst of laughter that lit up the room. Mike chuckled along, but Laura, my wife, shot me one of those looks. You know the kind. a tight-lipped warning behind the eyes. But honestly, I wasn't really joking. As things played out around the table, I felt like I wasn't even part of it. Like I was just an observer watching some twisted documentary unfold in real time. I couldn't stop my brain from analyzing every glance, every word. The tension between Laura and Mike wasn't just awkward anymore. It was electric. Something real was happening between them, and it was right in front of us all. Later, I found myself staring at the footage again. The motion sensor had triggered a new clip. I fast-forwarded through it. The energy on screen had shifted. It wasn't subtle anymore. They were laughing, touching. When Mike got up and retreated to the bathroom, the video showed what I can only describe as a glimpse behind the curtain of their friendship. "It's incredible," Mike had said earlier, his voice echoing in my memory. "Does he always make you feel that good?" And Laura, her response wasn't denial. Just a flat, "Only when I'm in the mood." That moment crushed something in me. I kept watching, letting the screen show me what my heart already knew. The next recording showed Laura, alone this time but not really. She was sitting with another man at a bar. I recognized neither the face nor the place, but I knew what came next before it happened. They laughed. They touched. They left together. Back in a hotel room, her actions told me everything. She wasn't reluctant and she wasn't confused. She was deliberate. It was then that Mike, no longer able to pretend, turned to me and asked, "So what do you want now?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Well," I said slowly, "it looks like we've got everything we need. Since there aren't any kids involved, I guess now we focus on the division of property." I looked around the room. And just so we're clear, Texas law still recognizes adultery as relevant in a divorce case. That got their attention. I turned to Laura and held out my hand. "Let me see your phone." She hesitated, her fingers trembling for a moment, but finally she handed it over without locking the screen. Mike fumbled with his words, unsure what to say next. Rachel, calm, sharp, handed me hers without a word. "I've got enough here to send a highlight reel to both your families if I wanted to," I said, my voice firm but low. "Your little speeches about loyalty and trust? I've got those on tape too." Laura looked like she wanted to collapse under the weight of it all. "Please," she said, her voice cracking. "Please just give me one more chance." I let her words hang in the air for a moment. Then I looked her straight in the eye. "Let me ask you this, Laura, if the roles were reversed, if you found a video of me with Rachel, would you be willing to work things out?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to, because we both already knew. At the end of it all, the truth stared us in the face. Laura had made her choice. She'd chosen deception over trust. She'd started taking those pills behind my back, without even a single conversation. No discussion. No moment of honesty. Just silence and a secret. And then there was Mike. Given everything we'd just uncovered, and especially our earlier conversations, I didn't think there were any more surprises left. But when Laura looked straight at Rachel and Mike, eyes full of confusion and disbelief, she asked the question I hadn't seen coming. "Was that you?" Her voice cracked as she turned to Rachel. "Did you actually go through with it?" Rachel froze for a second, caught between guilt and curiosity. "What exactly did he say?" she asked, her eyes narrowing as she looked at Laura. Fury flared in Laura's voice. "That despicable man said he'd never tolerate Carson being around. That if I ever brought it up again, if I ever got caught, he'd leave me. Just like that." She turned sharply to Mike. "Is that true? Did you really say that?" Mike, now visibly uncomfortable, nodded slowly. "I did," he said under his breath. "I'm sorry." Laura's strength buckled in an instant. Her body trembled as she clutched a set of legal papers in her hand. She began to sob, openly this time with no attempt to hold it in. Rachel, standing beside her, didn't quite know what to do. She looked at me, then at her husband, and finally let out a breath as she walked over to him. "This is it," she said quietly but firmly. "We're done." Mike blinked in shock, but Rachel didn't pause. "Go pack your things and leave the house. I don't want to see you anymore." Then, in a cold, level tone, she added, "If you say a single word to me right now, I'll make sure you regret it." I stood there watching it all unfold. The wreckage of two relationships lying side by side in the same room. Then Laura turned to me, eyes drained of fire but still holding something sharp beneath the surface. "We're getting divorced," she said plainly. "But we'll live separately for 3 months. You have that time to prove to me that you're even worth saving." I stared at her, speechless. "In the meantime," she went on, "I'm moving in with Rachel. She'll be taking over the room that used to be yours." Then she turned to me one last time, voice quieter now. "Do you get it, Carson?" I swallowed hard. What do you want me to do? She didn't hesitate. First thing? You beg Rachel for a chance to fix things. If she refuses, then it's over. No second round. Laura rose from her seat, already bracing herself for whatever came next. And in that moment, I couldn't help but reflect on how people make these impossible choices, how quickly love can turn into something else entirely. Not everyone chooses to fight. Some people take the easier path, or maybe the lonelier one. As Rachel and I stepped outside for some air, she gave me a glance, a flicker of emotion behind it. Then she let out a dry laugh, unexpected and strange. What? I asked. It's funny, she said, shaking her head slightly. I raised an eyebrow. What is? We kept walking until we reached her car. She paused, then started pulling off her jacket. The breeze picked up, but her words hung heavy in the air. Some people really believe they're in an open marriage, she said with a scoff. And then they're shocked when someone walks through the door. She wasn't just talking about Laura or Mike. She was talking about the fantasy. The illusion that you can break something and expect it to still hold weight. And just like that, she walked inside, leaving me to sit with that truth, cold and absolute. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say next. That's when everything changed. Out of nowhere, the world was disrupted, like the flick of a switch, by an invisible enemy, a virus that swept through from Wuhan, China. We had barely adjusted to our new lives when the lockdowns hit. Our vacation, like everyone else's plans, came to a halt. In its place, a monotonous loop of morning runs, afternoon walks, and the kind of physical closeness that was comforting, even if it didn't fix the fear clawing at us from the inside. Despite all the distractions, that fear never left me. And from the way Rachel looked at me sometimes, I knew she felt it too. It wasn't just the pandemic. It was everything we'd been through recently, betrayals, truths unraveling, people changing right in front of us. Then, just when I thought we might find some kind of calm, a letter arrived from Laura. It started simply. Hello, Carson. I hope you're doing well and finding a way to accept a new beginning. I read those words over and over. A new beginning? What did that even mean coming from her? Was she trying to say I was lucky? If she meant wealth, sure, I'd inherited money. I won't deny that. But if she thought that made me fortunate, she didn't understand. Before anyone thinks about praising or judging me, let me tell you, I didn't earn any of it. And I've been paying for it ever since. Not in dollars, but in everything else that matters. See, my parents built the foundation for everything I inherited. But they also laid down the cracks in who I became. No, they're not entirely to blame for the choices I made. I've had my share of agency in this life. But they aren't absolved either. Especially my father. The wealth came from his side. My dad was obsessed with preserving a legacy. He wanted to be remembered as a titan of industry, a successful businessman, admired and feared in equal measure. He worked endlessly, chasing status and profit like they were the only currency that mattered. He married late in life, at 44, to a woman barely 20. My mother. Their marriage wasn't a love story. It was a transaction. A calculated move to produce an heir, someone to carry the family name forward like a brand. That heir was me. But in his tightly wound world of meetings and deals, there was no room for a child. I wasn't part of his story. I was more like a footnote. My memories of him are blurry, almost symbolic. A shadow moving from one deadline to another, a man more myth than presence. I didn't learn the truth about their deaths until much later. For years I was told my father had died of heart failure, and that my mother had been killed in a car accident. Both deaths occurred on the same day. Everyone called it tragic, unbelievable even, but no one looked deeper. I did. What I found was a thread, nearly invisible but impossible to ignore once I'd tugged at it. My father's heart didn't fail on its own. It was helped along. The trigger? A 9mm slug that passed so quietly through the room it might as well have been a whisper. And my mother? Well, let's just say her car didn't veer off the road by accident. 2 deaths. One day. And me, left behind, the inheritor of everything they never said aloud. If there was one person I trusted, truly trusted, it was John Miller. A former military man, John was the kind of person who didn't sugarcoat things. He told the truth even when it hurt. Maybe especially when it hurt. That honesty, paired with a quiet kind of strength, made him the closest thing I've ever had to a father. He taught math at the academy, and that's where we met. I respected him immediately. But getting him to join my team after graduation? That was another story. John had no interest in the corporate world. He had little patience for suits and titles, and even less for people who climbed ladders just to look down on others. It's not my world, he'd said. I wouldn't know the first thing about business. But I knew better. I knew what he brought to the table had nothing to do with numbers and everything to do with values. It took some convincing, but eventually he agreed. Funny thing is, in those years after school, success came quicker than I ever expected. And with it came attention, the kind I never really asked for. What surprised me most was that I never had to make the first move. Women often approached me first, which felt strange considering I was never the standout guy in school. I was just average. What I lacked in talent, I made up for in focus. I worked harder than anyone else I knew. That's what got me through college. That's what earned me my master's degree with honors. In my 20s, I had more than a few women try to talk me into settling down. But no matter how promising the relationship seemed, I always pulled away. Marriage just felt too big. Too final. I wasn't ready to give someone that much of me, not yet. And then there was Chris. We weren't involved, not yet at least, but something about her caught my attention. She wasn't at her desk when I first went looking. Curious, I did some asking around and eventually learned which department she worked in. The next day, just before noon, I made my way over there. Nervous but determined, I asked if she'd want to grab lunch sometime. She smiled politely and declined. Said she didn't have the time that day. I nodded, thanked her anyway, and left. Quietly. A little disappointed, sure, but not surprised. Later, though, our conversation took an unexpected turn. So, Chris said one afternoon, catching me off guard, are you really that good in bed? The question landed like a stone in the middle of a still pond. Chris, I said slowly, I honestly don't know how to answer that. I mean, how do you even measure something like that? She gave me a playful but pointed look. You don't. You ask around. I blinked. Wait, what? She grinned. I talked to a few girls from the office. They all said the same thing, apparently no one even comes close to you. So, I figured I'd ask for myself. I didn't know what to say. It wasn't just awkward, it felt like I'd stepped into someone else's story. Someone I didn't fully recognize. I guess you'll have to take their word for it, I said, still trying to catch up. Chris leaned back. Don't worry, I'm not expecting romance. I'm not looking to get emotionally entangled. Just clarity. Clarity? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Yeah, she said. No strings. Just one weekend, nothing more. That's when she looked at me with this matter-of-fact expression and said, Okay, Carson. Pack a bag. We'll leave Friday after work. I stared at her. Wait, why? Where are we even going? She shrugged with a smirk. Don't worry. You'll find out. I want this to be something you'll always remember, Chris told me quietly, her eyes searching mine. Please pack enough for the whole weekend. We'll leave Friday afternoon. I wasn't sure what to expect, but there was a sincerity in her voice I hadn't heard before. She wasn't being playful, she meant it. She wanted this to matter. When Friday came, I learned the destination, Lake Tahoe. Chris was visibly nervous on the plane. She kept fidgeting, staring out the window and brushing strands of hair behind her ear with shaky hands. I tried to keep her calm, but honestly it meant a lot to me too. She had planned all of this. She'd found the perfect little chalet tucked into the pines, with windows that opened to a stunning view of the lake and mountains. The air was crisp, the kind that stings just enough to remind you you're alive. That first evening we walked the shoreline together, hand in hand. We didn't talk about anything heavy, just small things. Music, food, childhood stories. I remember laughing a lot. There was something about that calm, shared silence between our conversations that made it feel more intimate than words ever could. That night, something happened between us, something real. It was more than physical. It was personal and it was peaceful. It didn't feel rushed or dramatic. It felt like we both needed it for reasons neither of us could quite explain. Even if I never see Chris again that night, the feel of her hand in mine, the sound of her laugh echoing over the water, it's carved into me. I'll carry it until my last breath. The next day we headed home. But something about her had changed. Chris sat in silence most of the drive. Her shoulders tense, her eyes distant. I tried to ignore it at first, but eventually I asked, Are you okay? She didn't get the chance to answer. Out of nowhere, a car swerved in front of us. I slammed the brakes, but we couldn't avoid the crash. When we finally stopped, I was rattled but okay. I jumped out and ran to the car ahead. A woman was slumped behind the wheel, but awake. Dazed, shaken but conscious. She kept apologizing through tears, her hands trembling. It's okay, I told her gently, crouching beside her. You're going to be all right. Help is on the way. She looked up at me, desperate. Can you call my mom? Without thinking twice, I pulled out my phone and asked for her number. Within minutes, I was speaking to a worried voice on the other end, trying to explain everything as calmly as I could. That night, back at home, Everything seemed surreal. Chris didn't say much. And in truth, I didn't press. There was too much running through my mind, about fragility, fate, and how quickly everything can change. And somehow, through all of it, I found myself letting go of something I never thought I would. The mansion. The house my grandfather built. The place I was raised to see as my legacy. I realized I didn't need any of it. I didn't want the wealth. I didn't want the weight that came with it. I wanted peace, simplicity, and something that felt real. That's around the time I learned the truth about Laura. She had fallen for someone else. She didn't just sleep with him, she gave her heart to him. Or at least tried to. But he couldn't give her what she needed. And when she finally saw him for what he was, everything cracked. I wasn't there when it happened, but I heard the story clearly enough. She confronted him. He tried to buy her love, offering comfort, offering money. And she slapped him. Art. I'm told her words were firm, without an ounce of hesitation. You despicable scoundrel, she said. No amount of money will ever make me want to be with you. I was done with doubt. I needed the truth, and I was determined to get it. Now, I'm no genius when it comes to messy emotional entanglements or covert manipulations. I know that. So when I find myself in over my head, I don't try to bluff my way through. I bring in help. The right help. That's where John came in, again. He was the one who connected me with the top-tier people. Experts in surveillance, in legal strategy, in tracing lies back to the moment they were born. And as usual, John didn't waste time. Within days they were on the case. While all this was unfolding, I found myself dealing with another storm. Money. Some of my investments had tanked hard, and suddenly I was staring down a financial reality I never thought I'd face. Ernie, right? The guy everyone thought was set for life was now grasping at ways to keep it all afloat. It was then that he showed up, the man Laura had been seeing. A man who, as it turns out, saw me not as a person but as an opportunity. He thought I was his ticket out of obscurity. He had no idea that every word, every fake laugh, every scheming whisper was being recorded by the very security system I'd personally installed years ago. High-res audio. Clean visuals. Stored straight to my private server. There they were, sitting at my kitchen table, like it was just another casual Friday night. Plotting, strategizing, sipping wine. For them, it was a celebration. For me, it was evidence. And oh, was it satisfying. From the recordings alone, building a case against them was going to be a breeze. They didn't even try to hide it. The arrogance was unbelievable. So, he said to Laura, voice dripping with smugness, I've got a surprise. Oh, I love surprises, she replied, her tone light and flirtatious. I bet you'll be thrilled, he said with mock charm. I couldn't help but laugh under my breath as I watched. Thrilled? Please. Okay, he continued, join me and I'll tell you everything. We'll leave for the airport soon. Wait, what? I haven't even packed. Where are we going? What should I wear? She asked, genuinely excited. Don't worry, he said, smiling wide. If it were up to me, you wouldn't need clothes at all. That's when he dropped it, Paris. Of course. The classic romantic escape. But he didn't stop there. The next stop? Iceland. A small port town tucked away in the cold, rugged interior. Not exactly Laura's scene, she hated the cold. She hated silence. She hated anywhere that didn't offer instant room service and designer boutiques. So why take her there? Because I planned that part. We rented a car and drove 30 miles inland to a secluded resort. It was remote, peaceful, and completely cut off. The kind of place that forces people to stop talking in circles and start facing their truth. Laura kept asking why I'd chosen this spot. What my real reasons were. It's not exactly where I pictured our trip ending, she muttered more than once. Of course it wasn't. That was the point. She looked around, clearly uncomfortable. The mountains. The cold. The stillness. None of it fit her. This isn't really a vacation for you, is it? She asked finally. I gave her a long look. No, I said quietly. It's closure. I told her I'd been to that remote place before, years ago. There was something about it that left a mark on me and I wanted to feel it one last time. The quiet. The stillness. The way the cold pressed in and made everything else fall silent. It held something sacred, something I couldn't put into words. The trip wasn't about sightseeing. It wasn't even about escape. It was about closure. Well, that was never my aim. The fortune, the assets, the name, it was always her dream, not mine. Rachel had been the one pushing to secure more, build more, chase more. For me, it had always been about meaning. About peace. And somehow I'd ended up with neither. Sitting on the plane ride home, a strange sadness settled over me like a weight pressing into my chest. I looked out at the clouds and for a second, Wished her plans had worked out. Maybe then I wouldn't be on this flight, wrestling with emptiness. Maybe I wouldn't be alive at all. At least then, I could have left the world believing there was still something beautiful left in it. Instead, I landed back home, breathing, walking, heart still beating, but for what? The house was cold, not from the weather but from what was missing. There was no comfort in being alive if life meant silence, regret, and 100 questions without answers. I needed to speak with Chris. I can't let this go, I told her when I finally stood in front of her again. I need to understand what happened between us. She looked at me with tired eyes, but I didn't step back. Please just be honest with me, I said. Don't tell me no again. Not until we've talked this through. You never stop, do you? She said quietly. No, I replied. Not when it comes to you. I love you, Chris. I have for a long time. And I'm not walking away until I understand why things fell apart. Rob, she said, stepping back, you have no idea what you're doing. Then help me see it, I said. Help me make sense of it. I need to know. She turned her face away for a moment, gathering herself. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke. Please reconsider, Rob. You don't need someone like me in your life. I stared at her, trying to hold back everything rising up inside me. You're wrong, I said. You mean more to me than you'll ever understand. Her eyes welled up. That's why I ran. Because it's not your love that's the problem, it's me. I can't carry it. I don't know how. And just like that, the words we'd held back for years spilled out into the open air, raw, imperfect, but finally spoken.